The pirates were confident as they approached the mysterious ship. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The sleek black hull gleamed in the distant light of the stars, and there was something off about the ship. It had no markings, no insignia, and most strangely, no weapons listed in the ship's logs. The pirates thought this was their perfect opportunity. They had raided many ships before, but none like this. Their scanners showed no immediate threats, and they figured it would be an easy target. As their ship docked with the unknown vessel, the pirates could already hear the sound of laughter among the crew. They made jokes about how the ship was probably just a civilian transport, poorly equipped and unprepared for a raid. The thought of it being anything more than that seemed laughable to them. The captain of the pirate ship, a gruff and experienced leader, ordered his crew to board and begin their work. Weapons ready, they moved through the airlock and onto the silent ship, ready to claim their prize. The moment they stepped onto the ship, however, they noticed something strange. The air was thick, but not in a way that made it difficult to breathe. It was just unnervingly still. The lights flickered as if the ship's systems were barely functioning, and there was a smell of metal and oil that gave the entire place a cold, industrial feel. The pirates glanced at each other, unease creeping in. But their greed and confidence kept them moving forward. They had faced much worse before, and this was nothing more than a strange ship with no weapons. At least, that's what they thought. They advanced down a narrow corridor, weapons in hand, eyes scanning for any sign of life. The walls were smooth, and the floor was metallic, cold beneath their boots. The ship was dark and silent. The only sounds were the soft clank of their boots and the occasional whisper of air flowing through ventilation shafts. The ship felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was an odd sensation, but the pirates pushed it aside. After all, they had dealt with dangerous situations before, and they weren't afraid. Suddenly, one of the pirates, a young and overzealous crew member, broke the silence. He called out, "Hey, look at this." His voice echoed down the corridor. The rest of the pirates turned to look. The young pirate was crouched near a strange symbol on the wall. It wasn't like anything they had seen before. No standard language or markings, just a set of sharp, angular lines. The pirates gathered around him, but none of them could make sense of it. It didn't look like a warning. It didn't look like a decoration either. It was simply strange. They continued moving, more cautious now. The captain, feeling the shift in the mood, ordered everyone to keep their eyes peeled. As they turned another corner, the entire group was stopped dead in their tracks. Before them stood a large chamber with a massive, strange machine in the center. It was connected to the walls by a series of glowing tubes, which pulsed with faint blue light. The pirates stared at it, unsure what to make of it. The machine seemed to hum with quiet energy, but it didn't seem to be active. Still, it made the pirates uneasy. The captain stepped forward, motioning for the crew to stay back. He approached the machine cautiously. It was bigger than anything they had ever seen, and its design was completely unfamiliar. They were used to raiding ships with tech they could recognize and understand. But this was different. It looked almost alien. No, it was alien. But what did it do? Before anyone could voice their thoughts, the silence was shattered by a loud, shrill alarm. The pirates jumped in surprise, their weapons instinctively raised. But there was no immediate attack, no sudden threat. The alarms continued, a low, menacing sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire ship. Panic spread quickly. The crew of pirates began to look around, uncertain of what was happening. Their leader, the captain, scanned his crew, his eyes hardening. "Stay sharp. Something's not right." In an instant, the doors to the chamber slammed shut with a deafening crash. The pirates spun around, weapons aimed at the now sealed entryway. A loud click echoed through the room, followed by the sounds of metal moving. Something was happening. Then suddenly, the walls began to shift. The pirates froze, staring in confusion as the floor beneath them began to tilt. It wasn't a smooth motion either. It was jagged and uneven, making it feel like the entire ship was alive, like it was reacting to their presence. The ship was shifting, and they couldn't control it. "Get ready," the captain barked, his voice steady despite the growing panic among his crew. But no one was ready for what came next. Without warning, a blast of energy shot from the walls. The pirates scattered, but the blast was fast, faster than they could react. It hit one of the pirates, sending him flying back with a violent crash. The others scrambled to take cover, but more blasts followed, each one faster and harder to dodge. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a trap, and they were caught in it. The pirates tried to fire back, but their shots seemed to have no effect on the walls or the ship's systems. The room itself seemed to be fighting back, protecting whatever it was that lay within. A strange, eerie laugh filled the air, though no one could tell where it came from. The pirates tried to reach their ship through their comms, but all their signals were jammed. The ship wasn't just fighting them, it was trapping them inside. The crew began to panic. The more they tried to fight, the more the ship seemed to resist. They were surrounded, outgunned, and completely out of their element. The captain looked around, realizing just how serious the situation had become. He had underestimated the ship, and now the pirates were paying the price. They had thought this would be an easy raid, but they were wrong. This wasn't a ship to be raided. It was a death trap. One by one, the pirates were picked off, either by the ship's weapons or by the strange environment that seemed to come alive around them. The captain, still holding on to his hope that they could escape, barked orders at his crew. But the sound of their dying cries filled the air, each one a grim reminder of the deadly mistake they had made. As the last of the pirates fell, the ship fell silent again. The only sound left was the hum of the machines. The Deathworlder ship had triumphed, and the pirates had learned too late that some ships were never meant to be attacked. The captain's last thought, before he too was caught in the ship's deadly traps, was that they should have listened when they saw the warning signs. This ship was not like any they had ever faced. It wasn't just a ship, it was a Deathworlder's weapon, and they had underestimated it. The pirates were trapped in a nightmare. The ship's halls twisted around them like a maze, each corner they turned leading to another danger. They had thought they were the hunters, but now they were the hunted, and the Deathworlder ship was their predator. The strange energy blasts that had knocked out several of their crew members weren't the only threat. The ship seemed to have a mind of its own, shifting, changing, and trapping them at every turn. As the pirates regrouped, they realized they were cut off from the rest of their team. Their comms were useless, static filling their ears instead of the familiar voices of their crew. Panic was starting to set in, but the captain, though shaken, remained focused. "Stay together. Don't let the ship separate us," he ordered, though his voice lacked the usual confidence it once had. He knew this wasn't just a ship. They were up against something far more dangerous. But it was too late. As they made their way down another corridor, a loud grinding sound echoed from the walls. Suddenly, the floor beneath them began to tilt again, this time at a steeper angle. The pirates scrambled to keep their footing, but it was useless. One of them, a young pirate who had barely seen any real combat, slipped and tumbled down the hall, disappearing into the shadows before anyone could stop him. The captain's heart sank. They were losing control, and fast. They tried to find him, but the ship's shifting walls made it impossible to track where he had gone. It was as though the ship itself had swallowed him whole. The captain ordered two of the pirates to go after him, but they didn't return. The fear was growing, creeping into the hearts of the remaining crew. They had never encountered anything like this before. A ship that seemed alive, that could trap and kill them with such ease, was beyond anything they had imagined. The pirates had raided hundreds of ships across the galaxy, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the ship's physical traps that terrified them. It was the sense of being hunted. There was something else at play here. The ship was intelligent, aware of their every move. They had walked into a trap, and the trap was closing in on them. "Where is it coming from?" one of the pirates shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He had been standing at the edge of a small chamber when suddenly the walls shot up, enclosing him in a steel cage. The others rushed to help, but the ship's defenses had already sealed him inside. "No, get me out!" the trapped pirate screamed, his voice filled with terror as he pounded on the walls, but there was no way out. The ship seemed to have sealed him in, and the rest of the crew was powerless to help. The captain's heart raced. They were running out of time. Every second they wasted was another second the ship could trap them. The pirates' weapons, usually their greatest advantage, were useless here. They fired at the walls, hoping to break through, but their shots simply bounced off, doing no damage at all. The ship wasn't just made of metal. It was something else, something far stronger. Then came the sound. It started as a low rumble, almost like a growl, coming from deep within the ship. The pirates froze. It was as if the ship itself was alive, waking up to hunt them. The walls began to shift again, the floor tilting even more violently. They had no idea where to run. The ship had turned into a living nightmare, and there was nowhere to escape. The captain's mind raced. What was this ship? How had it been built? And why had it led them into this trap? He had heard rumors of ships like this. Ancient, powerful vessels from a long-forgotten civilization, but he had never believed them. Now, standing in the middle of it, he wished he had taken those stories more seriously. In a last-ditch effort, the captain ordered his crew to move toward the ship's control center, hoping that if they could access the main systems, they could somehow regain control. But as they moved through the twisting corridors, they found the way blocked at every turn. The ship seemed to anticipate their every move, always one step ahead. They tried to take shortcuts, but the ship's layout was ever-changing. Hallways stretched longer, rooms shifted to different locations, and doors that had once been open were now sealed shut. It wasn't just the layout that was shifting. It was the entire environment. One room they entered suddenly began to flood with water, rising rapidly around them. The pirates scrambled to find higher ground, but the water kept rising. They were trapped once again, caught in a room that wasn't just a room anymore. It was a death trap, designed to drown them. As the water reached their knees, then their waists, they struggled to climb to safety, but the walls of the room kept closing in, forcing them toward the center. The captain's thoughts raced, but there was no time to plan. The water reached his chest. One of the pirates, gasping for breath, reached out for a nearby railing, but was pulled under by the current before anyone could help him. The captain's heart sank. Another lost. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the water began to recede. The walls shifted again, and the room became dry once more. The pirates, now exhausted and on the verge of panic, looked around, trying to make sense of the chaos. It was clear that the ship had no intention of letting them leave. They were trapped in a living nightmare, and the ship was playing with them. With only a few remaining pirates left, the captain made a decision. They had to find a way off this ship, but they were no longer hunting for treasure or loot. Now, the only thing they wanted to do was survive. If they couldn't escape, they would die here, in the heart of this death trap. And in the end, the Deathworlder ship would have claimed yet another victim, one that never stood a chance. As the captain gathered the remaining crew, he realized with grim certainty they had been foolish to think they could raid this ship. This was no ordinary vessel. It was a Deathworlder ship. And in the galaxy, there was no greater mistake than underestimating them. The remaining pirates were barely hanging on. With each step they took, the Deathworlder ship seemed to change its shape, to shift its walls, to close in on them like an unrelenting predator. They had been ambushed, outsmarted, and now they were fighting for their survival. Every move they made felt like a gamble. Every corner they turned felt like a death sentence waiting to happen. The tension in the air was thick, and their nerves were frayed. The captain, now one of the last survivors, tried to maintain some semblance of leadership. His mind raced for a plan, but there was nothing. The ship was alive, a machine so advanced, so terrifying, that no amount of firepower or strategy could save them now. All they had left was the hope of finding some kind of exit, some escape, but even that seemed out of reach. The corridors they once walked with confidence now felt like labyrinths, twisting and contorting, leading them in circles, always to dead ends or traps. The pirates were caught in a never-ending nightmare. After what seemed like hours of wandering, one of the pirates, who had been on the verge of breaking down, suddenly cried out, "There! I see something." His voice was shaky, full of desperation, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The others rushed over to him, their hearts pounding with the possibility of escape. What he had found was a door, different from the others. It was a massive steel door, unlike the usual narrow, reinforced ones they had encountered. This one had strange markings on it, symbols none of them could understand. But it didn't matter. This could be the way out. The captain moved forward cautiously, inspecting the door. The strange symbols pulsed faintly, and for a moment he wondered if it was some kind of security measure, a final barrier to keep unwanted visitors out. He didn't hesitate long. With a quick motion, he hit the control panel next to the door. There was a pause, and then the door slid open with a low mechanical hum, revealing what lay beyond. Inside was a large chamber, empty except for a single pedestal in the center. The walls of the room were covered in the same strange symbols, but they seemed to glow now, brighter than before. The air in the room felt heavier, as though it was thick with something. The pirates hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was another trap, but the captain took a deep breath and motioned for the others to follow. There was no turning back now. They stepped inside the chamber, their boots echoing against the metal floor. The pedestal in the center seemed to draw them in, as if it were calling them forward. But what really caught their attention was the device resting on top of it. It was cylindrical, with jagged, sharp edges that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It wasn't a weapon, not in the way they understood weapons, but there was something undeniably dangerous about it. The captain reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly. He wasn't sure what he expected, but as his fingers brushed the device, the entire room seemed to tremble. A low, deep hum began to emanate from the pedestal, and the symbols on the walls brightened even more, as if they were reacting to the pirates' presence. The air crackled with energy, and the ship around them seemed to grow more alive. Before anyone could react, the device began to vibrate, its jagged edges glowing intensely. The captain quickly pulled his hand back, but it was too late. The device pulsed once more, and then everything went black. When the captain came to, the chamber was eerily silent. His head ached, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. He struggled to his feet, looking around. The other pirates were still unconscious, scattered across the floor. But something had changed. The ship felt different. It no longer felt like a machine. It felt like something alive. The air was still heavy, but now it felt more oppressive, as if the walls were closing in, suffocating them. The captain moved to check on the others, shaking them awake one by one. "Get up. We need to go," he whispered urgently. They had no idea what had happened, but it was clear that the ship had done something, and whatever it wasn't good. One of the pirates, still groggy, looked around in confusion. What was that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," the captain replied, his voice low. "But we need to move. Whatever this ship is, it's not just a ship anymore. It's something else." As they stood up, a chilling realization hit them. The door they had come through was now gone. The walls had shifted again, closing off the entrance to the chamber. They were trapped once more. But this time, it wasn't just the ship that was after them. Whatever the device had done, it had awoken something deep within the vessel. Something alive. The pirates' weapons were useless. They tried to fire at the walls, but their shots just bounced off, as if the ship was no longer responding to their attacks. The ship's systems had changed, had adapted. They were fighting something they couldn't understand, something far beyond their ability to control. The captain's mind raced. If they couldn't escape, then they had to fight. But what could they fight against? They weren't up against a crew or an army. They were up against the ship itself. The captain's words hung in the air, but they felt hollow. The pirates were no longer a crew fighting for loot or glory. They were survivors, clinging to the last shred of hope in a nightmare that only seemed to grow darker. The massive, shifting creature before them was no longer just a defense mechanism. It was part of the ship itself, a manifestation of its living, sentient nature. They were not dealing with technology anymore. They were dealing with something alive, something ancient and powerful. As the creature moved closer, its red eyes glowing with an eerie intensity, the pirates took up a defensive stance. They had no idea what they were up against, but one thing was clear: they couldn't outrun it. Their weapons, their skill, none of it mattered. The ship was alive, and it was controlling everything. The creature, an extension of the ship's will, moved like a predator hunting its prey. The captain signaled for the pirates to hold their ground, but inside, he was filled with dread. The room around them seemed to distort further, the walls closing in and shifting as though the ship itself was trying to suffocate them. It was no longer just a ship. It was a death trap, and every step they took felt like a misstep closer to their end. Without warning, the creature lunged, its massive hand reaching out with terrifying speed. One of the pirates tried to dodge, but it was too fast. The creature's hand slammed into the pirate's chest, sending him crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. The air left his lungs in a sharp gasp, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Blood oozed from a wound in his side, staining the floor a dark red. The captain's heart raced, but he didn't have time to mourn. The creature's attention was now on him. It moved with terrifying precision, as if it had been programmed to hunt them down, to eliminate them one by one. He knew they were outmatched, outgunned, but he couldn't just stand there and let them die without a fight. "We're not finished yet," the captain shouted, raising his blaster. The others followed suit, their weapons trembling in their hands. The pirate who had been knocked out earlier was beginning to stir, groaning in pain, but there was no time to check on him. The captain squeezed the trigger, releasing a stream of blaster fire at the creature. The bolts hit it, but they did nothing. The creature's body absorbed the blasts, as though it were made of liquid metal, reshaping itself to absorb the energy. It wasn't a machine anymore. It was a part of the ship's living system, a creature that adapted to everything they threw at it. "Fire! All of you!" the captain screamed, his voice frantic. The pirates let loose another barrage of shots, but again, it had no effect. The creature advanced slowly, methodically, its movements almost surgical. It raised one massive fist, ready to strike again. The captain's mind raced. He couldn't defeat it, not with their weapons, not with anything they had. And then he remembered the device. The one they had found earlier, the cylindrical object on the pedestal. Whatever it had done to the ship, whatever it had activated, it had triggered this chain of events. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was part of the ship's defense system, yes, but it was also something more. It was a guardian, an ancient sentinel meant to protect the ship from invaders. And the pirates had unknowingly become its prey. "Retreat," the captain ordered, motioning for his crew to fall back. But there was nowhere to go. The walls were shifting again, closing in, trapping them in the chamber. There was no escape from the creature, no escape from the ship. The only option left was to fight until they had nothing left. As the creature lunged again, the captain saw a glimmer of hope, just for a second. A weakness in the creature's chest, where the energy seemed to pulse more intensely than anywhere else. The blasters had no effect, but if they could hit that weak spot, aim for its chest, the captain shouted, trying to rally his crew. Focus fire on its core. The ship was silent now, its eerie hum replaced by a stillness that hung heavy in the air. The captain's heart was still racing, but he could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. His crew, what was left of them, stood in the dim, flickering light of the control room, bruised, battered, and shaken to their cores. The creature was gone, its body a lifeless heap in the center of the chamber, but the ship itself still loomed around them, alive, aware, waiting. "We need to keep moving," the captain said, his voice steady, but laced with the raw edge of urgency. He knew that even though they had defeated the creature, the ship itself was far from finished with them. They had triggered something bigger than they could possibly understand. This ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a sentinel, a living fortress, and it wasn't about to let invaders walk away unscathed. One of the remaining pirates, a woman whose name the captain barely knew, stepped forward, her expression dark. "But where do we go now?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "The creature's down, but the ship's still alive. We can't outrun it forever." The captain clenched his fists, frustration building within him. She was right. They were trapped, and every step they took seemed to push them deeper into the heart of a labyrinth of shifting walls and impossible corridors. The ship wasn't designed for escape. It was designed to hunt, to kill, to trap. "We need to find the core," the captain said, though he wasn't sure where he was leading them. The device they had found earlier, the one that had triggered the creature's activation, had to be the key. It was the only thing that had changed the ship's behavior, that had disrupted the flow of its deadly defense systems. If they could find it again, perhaps they could stop the ship from continuing its relentless pursuit. The crew nodded, their faces grim. They had no other choice. The room around them continued to shift and groan, as if the ship itself was reacting to their movements, tracking them, sensing their every step. The air felt thick now, heavier, like the ship was closing in on them. Every turn they made brought them deeper into the unknown, deeper into the heart of a ship that had become a monster in its own right. The captain led them down another corridor, his mind racing for a solution, but everything seemed to blur together. The walls, once straight and predictable, now twisted in unnatural angles, their surfaces shifting with an alien fluidity. It was like the ship itself was alive, its very structure a reflection of some unknown intelligence that they could never hope to understand. "There," one of the pirates suddenly shouted, pointing to a narrow passage at the end of the hall. It was dark, almost completely obscured by the shadows, but the captain could see a faint glow in the distance. It was dim, but it was something, a sign that they might be on the right track. They ran toward it, the sound of their boots echoing off the shifting walls. But the moment they stepped into the passage, the ship's response was immediate. The walls around them began to close, the space narrowing in a way that seemed too deliberate to be coincidence. The ship was trying to trap them again. "Move," the captain shouted, grabbing the nearest pirate and pulling him forward. They raced down the corridor, the walls grinding against each other as if they were alive, trying to crush them, to block their way. The light ahead grew brighter, and the captain pushed himself harder, his every muscle aching. They had to make it. They had to reach the core. As they rounded the final bend, they came into a large open chamber. It was a vast, cavernous room, its ceiling stretching high above them, disappearing into shadows. At the center of the room stood the object they had been searching for, a glowing core, surrounded by strange machinery, its pulsing light casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was the heart of the ship, the source of its power, its sentience, and it was here that they could either end the nightmare or be swallowed by it entirely. "Get to it," the captain ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. But as he spoke, the ship responded. The walls of the chamber began to contract, pushing in from every side, narrowing their escape. The ship was closing in again. The pirates ran toward the core, the captain at their head. But as they neared it, the ship's defenses kicked into overdrive. Laser beams shot out from hidden turrets, striking the ground around them, causing the floor to explode in violent bursts. They ducked and rolled, but the fire came faster, sharper. The pirates hesitated, then adjusted their aim. They fired with everything they had, blasting the creature's chest with concentrated shots. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, a loud screech echoed through the chamber, and the creature staggered back. The energy that had been pulsing inside it flared brightly, like a flare gone out of control. It was working. They were hurting it. But the creature was far from defeated. It roared in pain and fury, and with a single, sweeping motion, it sent the remaining pirates flying backward. One of them slammed into the wall and didn't get up. Another was knocked unconscious by the force of the impact. Only the captain remained standing, his body bruised and battered. But he wasn't done yet. He had to survive. They had to survive. The creature moved in for the final blow, its hand raised high, ready to crush him. But then, something strange happened. The ship groaned, a deep, echoing sound that shook the very walls. The creature paused, its glowing red eyes flickering, as if it were receiving a command from somewhere deep within the ship. It hesitated, confused, as if something had shifted, something beyond its control. For a brief moment, the creature's movements slowed, and the captain realized it was no longer focused entirely on him. Something was disrupting its connection to the ship, a crack in the seamless synchronization between the creature and the vessel. The ship itself was changing again, reacting to something. Perhaps the device they had activated, or perhaps the very presence of the pirates on board. In that fleeting moment of distraction, the captain lunged forward, using every ounce of strength left in him. He grabbed a piece of the ship's debris, a jagged shard of metal, and drove it into the creature's chest, right into the weak spot they had discovered earlier. The creature let out a terrible, screeching cry, louder than any sound they had heard before. It staggered back, its form convulsing. The walls of the chamber shook violently, and the lights flickered. The creature's red eyes began to fade, its form dissolving into the air like mist. Within moments, it collapsed to the ground, its body becoming nothing more than a heap of twisted metal and energy. The ship groaned again, but this time it was different. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and the walls that had closed in began to retract. The captain stood, gasping for breath, looking at the remains of the creature. It wasn't dead. It had been deactivated, but the ship was still alive, still sentient, still watching. But for the first time since they had boarded, there was a chance. They weren't completely trapped. Not yet. The captain turned to his remaining crew, his voice hoarse but filled with a new sense of determination. "We're not done yet," he said. "But we've made it this far. Let's finish this." They still had a long way to go, but for the first time, the captain felt a flicker of hope. They had won a small victory, but in this living nightmare, even a small victory was worth fighting for. A sudden, sharp noise echoed through the chamber. The ship had come to life again. The walls began to shake violently, and the floor beneath their feet started to split. A large metal door, one they hadn't seen before, slid open with a hiss. The pirates jumped back in surprise as something began to emerge from the shadows behind the door. It was massive, towering over them like a living nightmare. The captain's eyes widened in shock. It wasn't a person, or even an alien. It was a machine, but it wasn't like anything they had ever seen. It had the shape of a humanoid, but its body was made of shifting metal, constantly changing, reshaping itself with every step it took. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed a fierce red, and its movements were unnatural, almost fluid, as though it was a part of the ship itself. The pirates instinctively raised their weapons, but they knew it was futile. This thing wasn't something they could kill with a blaster. The captain turned to his remaining crew, a final surge of adrenaline pushing him forward. "We fight. We survive," he growled, his voice full of resolve. But deep down he knew, no one would make it off this ship alive. Not unless they understood what they were truly up against, and they were too far gone to ever comprehend the true nature of their enemy. "Move, move, move," the captain yelled, pulling one pirate out of the line of fire as another took a hit, collapsing to the ground. The crew was dwindling, but they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. Finally, the captain reached the core. It was housed in a massive, glowing container, its energy surging and crackling with raw power. It was beautiful and terrifying, a force of nature contained in a fragile cage. He had no idea how to deactivate it, but he knew one thing for sure. They needed to do it now. With a final, desperate surge of energy, the captain grabbed a nearby console, using the few remaining minutes of his crew's distraction to begin pulling up the ship's control system. It was alien, confusing, but his hands moved with precision. He had no idea what he was doing, but instinct told him to disable the core, to stop the ship's heart from beating. A loud beep echoed through the chamber. The core began to pulse erratically, its light flashing in a strobe effect. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation. The ship groaned, a deafening sound that shook the room, as if the entire vessel was aware of what was happening. And then, with a sudden burst of light, the core shut down. The entire ship shuddered as if it had taken a blow to the chest. The walls stopped moving. The ship's humming ceased. It was as if the heart of the ship had stopped beating, and with it, the living nightmare they had been trapped in. The captain stood in the silence that followed, breathing heavily, his body shaking with exhaustion. His crew was down to a few, and the ship, once a living predator, was now just a shell. Empty, silent. "We did it," one of the remaining pirates whispered, disbelief in her voice. The captain looked around at the destruction, at the price they had paid to survive. They had won, but at what cost? They had survived, but they were alone, stranded in the heart of an ancient dead ship. "We did," the captain said quietly, staring at the deactivated core. "Now, let's find a way out." The nightmare was over, but the journey was far from finished. The stars still waited beyond the darkness, and humanity still had a place to claim among them. But for now, all that mattered was the fragile victory they had fought so hard for. And the ship, it was just another silent testament to the relentless spirit of those who dared to challenge the unknown. The silence that followed their victory was unsettling. The ship, once a living entity, now felt like a hollow shell. The faint hum of its engines had faded, leaving only the eerie quiet that seemed to stretch into eternity. The crew, what remained of them, huddled together in the control room, their faces pale from exhaustion, their eyes wide from the horrors they had witnessed. But despite the terror, they had survived. And that meant something. "We need to move," the captain said, his voice low but filled with determination. "The ship may be dead, but we're not out of danger yet. We don't know how long it'll take for the rest of the fleet to realize we're here." The crew nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had no time to rest. They were still deep inside the heart of an alien vessel, with no way to know if they would make it back to the safety of their own ship, or if they'd even survive long enough to be found. They moved quickly through the dark corridors, the flickering lights casting long shadows on the walls. The ship's layout had changed in subtle, horrifying ways since their initial encounter with the creature. Hallways that had once been straightforward now twisted and turned, as if the ship itself was reacting to their presence. It felt alive, aware, and as much as they wanted to believe it was finally powerless, there was no guarantee. The captain led them forward, the small group of survivors trailing behind him. Every step they took felt heavier, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. They had seen things no one should ever have to see, and even though they had fought back against an impossible foe, they knew the galaxy wasn't finished with them yet. "Keep moving," the captain urged. "Don't slow down. We're not safe until we're out of here." The corridors twisted ahead, like an ever-changing maze. The ship's once intelligent design had become a distorted nightmare, its walls contorting in ways that seemed unnatural. It was like the ship had been built to trap them, to disorient and confuse. They had to fight not just against the creature, but against the very structure of the vessel. At last, they reached a chamber, vast and open, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. It looked almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just survived. But that peace felt wrong. It felt like a trap. The captain paused, scanning the room. There was something in the center, an odd metallic structure, almost like a control panel, but far more intricate than anything they had seen before. The air in the room was thick with energy, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep in their bones. Whatever it wasn't like anything they had ever encountered. It was alien in the truest sense of the word. "What is this place?" one of the surviving pirates asked, her voice shaking slightly. "This doesn't look like any part of the ship we've seen before." The captain stepped forward cautiously, his instincts on high alert. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew they needed to figure out what this was. They couldn't leave until they understood it, until they knew the full extent of what they had been dealing with. "I don't know," he replied, his voice hard. "But we need to find out. This could be our ticket out of here, or it could be our grave." As he moved closer to the structure, a sudden surge of energy shot through the room. The panel flickered to life, its lights flashing bright, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ship's walls. The crew froze, fear creeping into their hearts. Then, as if on cue, the ship's walls began to shift again, this time with a violent, grinding motion. The chamber trembled, the lights flickering wildly, and a deafening roar filled the air. Something was coming. The ship was awake again. It was angry. "We need to go, now," the captain shouted, grabbing the nearest pirate and pulling him toward the exit. The others scrambled to follow, but the door to the chamber slammed shut with a thunderous crash, trapping them inside. The crew turned in panic, eyes wide, hearts racing. The walls were moving, pushing in on them from every side. The ship was alive, and it wasn't going to let them leave. "Find a way out," the captain shouted, his voice desperate. He moved to the control panel, his hands flying over the alien buttons and switches, trying to make sense of it all. He could feel the heat building around them, the walls closing in with every passing second. But the ship wasn't making it easy. The energy surging from the panel grew more intense, and the walls began to close even faster. It was like the ship was alive, aware of their every move, anticipating their every action. The captain cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. "Captain, we can't keep this up," one of the pirates yelled. "We need to get out of here before." Before he could finish, the entire room shook violently. The walls creaked and groaned, as if the ship was straining under some invisible force. The ship was alive, and it was angry. The captain gritted his teeth. There had to be something, some way to stop it. He didn't have all the answers, but he couldn't just give up. Then something caught his eye, a flashing light on the control panel. It was different from the others, bright, almost frantic. It was a signal, a code. Without thinking, the captain slammed his hand down on the button, praying that it would work. The room shook even harder, the walls bending inward with crushing force. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The ship fell silent. The walls ceased their movement. The rumbling stopped. The tension in the air lifted, and the energy that had been swirling around them began to dissipate. The captain opened his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. It had worked. Somehow, he had triggered something. Some mechanism that had shut the ship down once more. "Are we free?" one of the pirates whispered, barely able to believe it. The captain looked around at his battered crew. There was no telling how much longer the ship would remain dormant, but for now, they had won. "We need to get out of here," the captain said quietly, "before it wakes up again." They turned and moved as one, the captain leading the way through the now quiet corridors. The ship had been defeated for now, but the galaxy still awaited them, and the lessons they had learned here would echo through their lives for years to come. The nightmare was over, But they knew this was just the beginning of something even greater. The stars were waiting for them, and they would face whatever came next together. The crew of the exiled Fury emerged from the ship's labyrinthine halls, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. They had barely escaped the wrath of the alien vessel, alive but forever changed. The silence of the void greeted them as they stepped back into the cold emptiness of space. The alien ship that had once seemed invincible now lay dormant behind them, a hollow husk of its former self. The crew stood on the observation deck of their own ship, staring out into the dark abyss of space. Their ship, though damaged, had managed to hold together long enough to escape. The damaged systems flickered on, slowly regaining some semblance of functionality. But the real battle was far from over. "We made it," the captain said quietly, though his words lacked the relief they might have once carried. His gaze was fixed on the black expanse beyond the window, his mind still racing with thoughts of the encounter. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had merely survived the beginning of something far more dangerous. One of the surviving pirates, the one who had been closest to the captain throughout the ordeal, broke the silence. "What now, Captain? We've taken out the ship, but that thing, it wasn't alone. We're still out here, in the middle of their territory. What do we do?" The captain turned to face his crew, a hard glint in his eyes. "We find out what's next. We survive, and we make sure that ship's fate is a warning to anyone else who thinks they can cross us. We're not leaving until we've figured out just how deep this goes." The crew nodded, their faces grim. They had fought through the horrors of that alien ship, but the captain's words resonated with them. There was still much to uncover. The strange technology, the creature that had seemed so otherworldly. It was clear now that they had stumbled upon something much bigger than just a random attack. This wasn't just a pirate ship. This was a warning, a harbinger of something darker. "Send out a distress signal," the captain ordered, his voice calm but firm. "I want a full sweep of the area. We need to know if there's any other activity nearby, any sign of reinforcements. The last thing we need is a fleet of these things showing up." The pirate at the communications console worked quickly, tapping away at the control panel. A low hum filled the room as the signal sent out, though the captain knew it might take a while for a response. After all, they were in uncharted space, far from any major civilization. It could be days before anyone even noticed they were here. "We won't wait that long," the captain muttered to himself, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "We'll find our own answers." Hours passed in tense silence, the crew working methodically to repair their ship and ensure they were ready for whatever might come next. The captain stayed at the helm, his fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the console, eyes scanning the monitors for any sign of activity. The stars outside flickered in the vastness of space, indifferent to the struggles of those within the ship. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the comms officer spoke up. "Captain, we've received a transmission. It's from the Galactic Council." The captain's heart skipped a beat. The last thing they needed was to deal with the bureaucratic red tape of galactic politics. But he knew that if the Council had noticed their distress signal, it was either because they had done something significant, or because someone was about to come after them. "Put it through," he said, settling back in his chair, bracing himself for whatever would come next. The transmission crackled to life, and the face of a council official appeared on the screen. The woman was dressed in the formal robes of her office, but her expression was stern. There was no hint of sympathy, no recognition of the crew's struggle. "You are the crew of the exiled Fury?" she asked, her voice cold and distant. "That's us," the captain replied, his voice steady. "We're requesting assistance. We've just destroyed an alien vessel that was far beyond anything we've encountered. We need immediate support and a safe route back to civilized space." The council official's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "I see. Your actions have attracted attention. You should be aware that the ship you destroyed was part of a larger, much more dangerous operation. Your actions have complicated things." The captain frowned. "What do you mean, complicated? We destroyed a threat. The galaxy is better off without them." The official's expression remained unchanged. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions. The ship you destroyed was not just a pirate vessel. It was part of a larger war effort. The forces you've angered are not something you can fight off with a few scattered pirates. You've just declared war on an empire, and they will not stop until you are eradicated." The captain's blood ran cold. "War? With an empire? We're just a ragtag crew," he said, trying to process the gravity of the situation. "What do you expect us to do against an entire empire?" The council official's gaze softened, though only slightly. "You've proven yourself to be resourceful, Captain. And for that reason, we are offering you a choice. You can return to galactic space, where we will protect you, or you can stay out here, where your survival is no longer guaranteed. The empire you've provoked has many more ships, and they are not merciful." The captain took a deep breath, weighing the options. He knew the crew couldn't go back to the safety of the Galactic Council. They would never make it, and he couldn't turn his back on the galaxy, either. He had a duty, a responsibility. "I'll take my chances," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We're not going anywhere until we finish what we started. We'll fight this war our way." The council official's eyes flashed with something resembling approval. "So be it, Captain. But know this, there is no going back now." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the crew in silence once again. The captain stood, his mind racing with the weight of the decision he had just made. "Prepare for war," he said, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning."